All right, so today we're going to dive into some seriously fascinating territory. You know, this whole Russian spy operation thing since the Ukraine war began.
Hmm.
And you sent over a Wikipedia article detailing a network of these Russian spies.
Hmm. Yeah,
It spans the globe, and some are hiding, right there in plain sight.
right,
Others are living these deep undercover lives with like totally made up identities.
right.
It's crazy, and it's got me thinking, has all of this since 2022, been a success for Russia or a failure?
Well, that is the question, isn't it? And the answer is a lot more nuanced than I think a lot of people would realize.
Okay.
What's really interesting here is just the sheer variety of spies that Russia uses,
Okay.
the different targets that they're going
All
after,
right.
and the different tactics they've adopted to get what they want.
Yeah.
And it's not all, cloak and dagger stuff.
Right, right. The Wikipedia article actually outlines two main categories of these spies.
Yeah,
It calls them legals and illegals. We've all heard about like diplomats being accused of spying,
of course, yeah.
but what exactly does that look like in practice?
Well, legals are basically intelligence officers,
Yeah.
and they're operating undercover as diplomats.
Okay.
And they use their position to gather information, recruit assets, and even, spread disinformation.
Oh, wow.
Think of it as espionage under the guise of diplomacy.
Okay, so they're like using that diplomatic cover as a shield to
Exactly.
carry out these activities.
Right.
So how do they actually pull that off? I mean, surely their diplomatic activities are like monitored, right?
Oh, of course they are, but, there's a lot of room to maneuver within those constraints.
I see.
So they might attend, conferences and events,
Right.
cultivate relationships with key individuals,
Yeah.
and even use their access to diplomatic channels
Okay.
to like transmit sensitive information.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So they're not just attending these cocktail parties and, shaking hands. They're actively out there gathering intelligence, furthering Russia's agenda.
Yeah, precisely. And sometimes their cover is blown,
Right.
which is what happened in 2022 and 2023,
Okay.
when over 600 Russian diplomats were expelled from different countries around the world.
Wow.
And a lot of them were identified as spies.
That's a huge number.
It is.
The article even quoted Richard Moore,
Yeah.
the head of MI6,
Right.
saying that roughly half of Russia's spies under diplomatic cover in Europe
Uh-huh.
were expelled by July of 2022.
Yeah, that was a massive blow to their intelligence network.
It had to have been.
It was definitely a disruption to a big chunk of their operations,
Right.
but it also shows how countries are starting to take a harder line against all this.
Right, taking it more seriously now.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's shift gears now and talk about the illegals, as the article calls them.
Okay.
These are the deep cover operatives who live under assumed identities
Mm.
for years, sometimes even decades.
Yeah.
The article mentions that they often try to infiltrate like political, cultural, industrial, and even military organizations.
Exactly. It's like something straight out of a spy thriller.
It really is.
I mean, these individuals spend years constructing these really elaborate backstories.
Wow.
They might even start families to blend in,
No.
make their cover even more believable.
Yeah.
Essentially, they're living double lives,
Right.
just waiting for that moment when they get called on to, activate their mission.
The dedication is just mind-blowing to me.
It is.
But why go through all that trouble?
Yeah.
What is the ultimate goal for these deep cover operatives?
They're not just passively gathering intelligence.
Okay.
They're looking to actively influence decision-making, manipulate events, and even sabotage their targets if they need to.
It's high stakes stuff.
It is high stakes. Think of them as sleeper agents,
Right.
ready to be activated when the time is right.
So the article gives a few examples of these illegals being uncovered. And one that really stood out to me was the case of Maria Sala in Greece.
Oh, yeah.
This woman was operating under a dead infant's identity
That's crazy.
for 30 years
Uh-huh.
and running a knitting shop in Athens as her cover.
Yeah. You have to think about the psychological toll that all takes
I can't even imagine.
to live a lie for that long.
Right.
To always be looking over your shoulder.
Yeah.
It requires a very particular kind of personality.
Right.
Someone who can compartmentalize,
Yeah.
detach from their true identity, and just maintain that deception for years and years.
It really makes you wonder what would make someone choose that path,
It does.
Is it ideology,
Yeah.
money,
Right.
a sense of adventure?
It's probably a combination of all of those things.
Yeah.
And it's not always, smooth sailing.
Right.
When Sella's network was compromised, she vanished,
Oh, wow.
just disappeared.
So they're trained to do that.
These deep cover operatives are trained to just vanish without a trace if their cover's blown. They leave their entire fabricated lives behind.
It's a lot to unpack just with Salah's case alone.
It is.
And the article highlights even more examples, like the spy ring they uncovered in Australia in early 2023.
Right.
This network had been operating for 18 months.
Yeah.
And it included deep cover operatives and fake diplomats.
It really shows how broad their operations are.
Yeah, it really does. So Australia might seem like an unexpected target.
It does.
But it really demonstrates that Russian espionage isn't limited to countries that are geographically close to the conflict.
Right.
They're casting a wide net here, extending their reach even to places that we might consider unlikely.
Exactly. They're thinking globally.
So it seems like distance doesn't deter them.
Nope.
And the case of Sergei Cherkasov in Brazil is another great example of their ambition, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. This guy painstakingly constructed a fake Brazilian identity.
Wow.
He called himself Victor Muller Ferreira,
Okay.
and he was trying to infiltrate the International Criminal Court
What?
as an intern.
Wow, to target the ICC. That's audacious, to say the least.
It's incredibly audacious.
But it backfired when Dutch authorities, tipped off by Western intelligence,
Yeah.
arrested him and deported him back to Brazil.
Right.
What I find fascinating is that he's currently in prison for identity fraud, but Russia is desperately trying to extradite him.
That's right. It raises some interesting questions, doesn't it?
It does.
If Cherkasov's actions were sanctioned by the Russian government,
Right.
why are they trying so hard to get him back?
Yeah.
What are the potential ramifications if he were to, reveal sensitive information?
Yeah, it's a high-stakes game of chess with Brazil caught right there in the middle.
Yeah.
And it shows just how far Russia is willing to go to put their agents in positions of influence.
Absolutely.
So what other interesting examples did the article uncover?
Well, there's the case of the spy ring uncovered in Poland in March 2023.
Okay.
It was a 16-person network, and they were focused on sabotaging military aid to Ukraine.
Now, that's a direct attempt to undermine Western support. Were they successful?
Well, that's where things get a little murky.
Okay.
The article doesn't really give a lot of details on, what they achieved.
I see.
But it does highlight a really fascinating aspect of this particular ring.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's so unique about the Poland operation?
This ring was made up mostly of amateurs, not seasoned intelligence officers.
Really?
Yeah, this suggests that Russia is willing to use less trained individuals
Okay.
for certain tasks, maybe to minimize the risk or expand their operational capacity.
That's a chilling thought.
It is.
It suggests a much wider pool of potential operatives than we might imagine.
Right. It's not just elite spies anymore. It's about leveraging anyone who might be helpful to their cause.
So even seemingly ordinary people can be drawn into this world of espionage.
Exactly.
Either willingly or unwittingly. It makes you wonder, are we all potential pawns in this global game?
That's a question we're thinking about, and it's one we'll explore more as we go deeper into these individual cases and what they tell us about the motivations and effectiveness of Russian espionage since 2022.
It sounds like we're just scratching the surface here.
We are?
The article also mentioned cases in Germany and the UK, right?
It does, and there's a fascinating case of a double agent in Germany.
Okay, now that's what I call a plot twist. Tell me more.
His name is Carsten Link,
Okay.
and he was working for both the German intelligence service and Russia's FSB.
Talk about living a double life.
I know, right?
That's got to take a psychological toll.
It does.
Damn, he can turn.
Well, the article doesn't really get into his motivations,
Okay.
but his case really underscores the danger of moles within intelligence agencies.
Right.
It's a stark reminder that even the most secure organizations can be infiltrated
Yeah.
and manipulated.
It's like something out of a John le Carré novel, you know?
It really is.
Trust betrayed secrets leak the potential for just catastrophic damage. It makes you wonder who you can really trust in this game.
It does, and it highlights how important counterintelligence efforts are. Constantly being vigilant and adapting to new threats.
Okay, so speaking of seemingly ordinary positions, posing a surprising level of access.
Yeah.
The article also mentions the case of David Ballantyne Smith in the UK. He was just a security guard at the British Embassy in Berlin.
Right.
But he was caught spying for Russia.
It's a reminder that even low-level personnel can pose a significant security threat.
Right.
if they have access to sensitive information
Yeah.
or certain areas.
We often focus on the high-ranking officials,
We do.
but it's sometimes those seemingly insignificant roles that give a surprising level of access.
Right.
And then there's the case of the Bulgarians arrested in the UK in 2023
Yeah.
on suspicion of spying for Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And what struck me about this one was that they were found with fake identity documents for various EU countries.
Right. That's a key detail.
It is.
It suggests that they were part of a larger network, potentially,
Oh, wow.
maybe waiting to be activated and disappear into another country. It raises questions about Russia's long-term objectives in Europe
Yeah.
and their willingness to invest in this long game of espionage.
It seems like there's always another layer to uncover when it comes to espionage.
Oh, absolutely. These cases we've talked about,
Right.
they're just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
There's a whole hidden world of espionage going on beneath the surface with its own rules, its own players,
Yeah.
and its own high-stakes game.
Hmm.
And that brings us back to our original question.
Okay.
Has all of this been a success for Russia or a failure?
Right. We've seen their reach their tactics, their boldness, but have they actually achieved their goals? What does the article say about the effectiveness of all of this?
Well, like I said earlier, the answer is complex, and that's where we'll pick up next. Exploring the evidence of both successes and failures in Russian espionage since 2022.
I'm already hooked. Let's get into it.
So we've seen just how extensive these Russian spy operations really are, how elaborate they are. But has all this clandestine activity actually, produced results for Russia?
That's what I'm really curious about. Did they manage to actually influence things in their favor?
Right.
Or did they totally miscalculate? The Wikipedia article mentioned something about their effectiveness being mixed.
It did. And to understand that, I think we need to look at what their objectives actually were.
Okay.
One of their main goals, particularly in the West, was to sow discord.
Okay.
Exploit those existing social and political divisions and really try to undermine trust in democratic institutions.
So they were trying to kind of weaken their opponents from within?
Exactly. And in this regard, I think they did achieve a certain degree of success.
Okay.
They were able to amplify certain narratives, often through disinformation campaigns.
Right.
And those narratives, played into those existing societal anxieties and fueled polarization.
Can you give an example of how they did that?
Well, think about the spread of disinformation and propaganda related to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay. Yeah.
Russian intelligence agencies played a big role in amplifying conspiracy theories.
Right.
And sowing distrust in public health measures.
Right.
They were able to tap into that existing anti-establishment sentiment and further erode trust in government institutions.
So they weren't creating these divisions out of thin air. They were more exploiting these pre-existing fault lines.
Exactly. They were really good at identifying those vulnerabilities.
Right.
And tailoring their disinformation campaigns to fit.
Yeah, it's a very subtle but effective form of manipulation.
It is.
But influence over narratives is one thing.
Right.
Did they actually manage to translate that into real political influence?
Right. So
Did their espionage activities actually sway any key decisions or events?
that's where things get a little more complicated.
Okay.
While they were successful in shaping perceptions and generating noise, there's less evidence to suggest that they were able to directly manipulate political outcomes in any decisive way.
So they were good at creating chaos, but not necessarily at controlling the outcome.
That seems to be the case, and perhaps most importantly, the article highlights two major miscalculations
Okay.
that really undermine their overall effectiveness.
Oh, what were those?
Well, firstly, they really underestimated the strength and resilience of Ukrainian resistance to the invasion.
Okay.
They seem to have expected a swift victory
Right.
with the Ukrainian government collapsing under pressure.
And that obviously didn't happen.
It didn't. Ukraine put up a much tougher fight than anyone anticipated.
Right.
And this miscalculation, I think, points to a potential blind spot
Okay.
within Russian intelligence.
Yeah.
Maybe they were relying on outdated information,
Right.
or had become too entrenched in their own narratives about Ukraine's weakness.
It also suggests a failure to accurately assess the morale and the determination of the Ukrainian people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the second major miscalculation, according to the article, was their underestimation of the West's willingness to provide sustained and robust support to Ukraine.
So they didn't anticipate the level of unity and resolve among Western nations.
That's right. They seem to have believed that Western support would quickly fade.
Okay.
That internal divisions and economic pressures would eventually, force the West to back down.
It seems like they overplayed their hand,
Yeah.
assuming that their disinformation campaigns and attempts to sow discord would be enough to fracture those Western alliances.
Right. And these miscalculations had, pretty significant consequences.
Yeah.
If they had accurately assessed the situation,
Right.
they might have thought twice about launching a full-scale invasion in the first place.
It's a reminder that even with these vast intelligence networks, there's always a limit to what you can know and control.
Right.
Human behavior, especially in the face of these existential threats,
Yeah.
can be very unpredictable.
It can, and it also highlights the importance of critical thinking and independent analysis within these intelligence agencies. If analysts become too beholden to these preconceived notions or political pressures,
Yeah.
they risk making these costly misjudgments.
So in a way, these miscalculations also reveal a certain fragility within the Russian intelligence apparatus.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
It suggests that despite their reputation for ruthlessness and cunning,
Right.
they're not infallible.
Right.
They make mistakes. They miscalculate.
Yeah.
And those mistakes can have serious consequences.
So where does that leave us in terms of assessing the overall effectiveness of their espionage activity since 2022? It seems like a mixed bag so far.
It is. And while it's tough to draw definitive conclusions,
Right.
the article does ultimately suggest that while Russian spy operations have definitely posed a significant security threat,
Uh-huh.
their overall impact has been less decisive than you might assume.
So more of a nuisance than an existential threat.
Not necessarily a nuisance, but maybe not the game changer that some might have feared.
Okay.
They've certainly caused disruption. They've stolen secrets,
Right.
but they haven't really fundamentally altered the course of events.
It's a good reminder that espionage is just one element in a
right.
much larger and more complex geopolitical game.
Exactly. Military strength, economic power, diplomatic maneuvering, technological innovation.
Right.
All these factors come into play.
And let's not forget the human element.
Of course.
The courage and resilience of the Ukrainian people have played a huge role in thwarting Russia's ambitions.
Absolutely. In many ways, this conflict has shown the limitations of traditional espionage.
Yeah.
In a world where information is becoming increasingly democratized,
Right.
and where the will of the people can still make a real difference.
That's a hopeful thought.
It's
But I imagine Russia is going to continue to adapt and evolve its espionage tactics in response to these setbacks.
Oh, they will.
So what does the future hold in your estimation?
It's hard to say for sure.
Right.
But one thing is clear. Western intelligence agencies are learning from all of this. They're adapting their own tactics.
Yeah.
And they're strengthening their defenses.
So it's a constant game of cat and mouse,
It is.
with each side trying to outmaneuver the other.
Exactly. And the stakes are higher than ever.
Yeah.
Especially in these times of heightened geopolitical instability.
Right. Cyber espionage, disinformation campaigns, targeting critical infrastructure.
Yeah, these are all evolving threats
Right.
that require new approaches to counterintelligence.
That makes sense. But beyond just the technical aspects of espionage,
Right.
there's also the question of how the world should respond to these revelations about Russia's activities.
That's a crucial point, and it's one that the article touches upon,
Okay.
but doesn't fully explore.
Yeah, it does seem like a crucial question. We've seen the scope of these operations, their mixed effectiveness, and the really high stakes that are involved. But how should the world respond to, Russia just doing all this stuff all the time?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a tough one because it requires a very delicate balancing act.
Right.
On one hand, countries need to take action
Yeah.
to protect their own security
Right.
and deter, further espionage.
Mm-hmm.
This includes strengthening counterintelligence capabilities,
Okay.
sharing intelligence with allies,
Right.
and imposing costs, diplomatic and economic, on Russia for their actions.
But on the other hand, we can't just, escalate tensions or completely shut down all diplomatic channels.
Exactly.
So how do we strike that balance?
It's a complex geopolitical challenge for sure.
Yeah.
I think we need a very calibrated approach,
Okay.
one that combines deterrence
Right.
with a very clear understanding of Russia's motivations and objectives.
Okay.
It's not just about catching spies.
Right.
It's about understanding the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Why are they doing this?
Mm-hmm.
What are they hoping to achieve?
Right.
And then crafting a strategic response that minimizes those risks while still maximizing security.
So a multi-pronged approach.
Exactly.
Involving diplomacy, intelligence,
Yeah.
and a willingness to actually hold Russia accountable
Right.
for their actions.
Uh-huh. And it's not just governments that have a role to play here.
Oh, okay.
Businesses, universities, research institutions.
Yeah.
Everyone needs to be aware of this threat
Right.
and take steps to protect themselves.
Okay. So what kind of steps can these organizations actually take?
Right.
I mean, it all seems so shadowy and sophisticated.
It does, but a lot of it comes down to just fostering a culture of vigilance.
Okay.
Being aware of the potential threats
Mm-hmm.
and taking some basic security precautions.
Right.
This could include things like cybersecurity training for employees,
Okay.
vetting potential partners really carefully,
Yeah.
and being cautious about what information they share publicly.
So knowledge is power in a way.
It is.
The more people understand about espionage, the methods they use, the motivations behind it,
Mm-hmm.
the less vulnerable they become to it.
Espionage thrives in the shadows.
Right.
So by shining a light on it, by understanding how they operate and why,
Right.
we can make ourselves a lot less vulnerable to their manipulation.
Well, this deep dive has definitely shined a light on a topic
It has.
that often does stay hidden in secrecy.
Yeah.
We've explored all these different types of Russian spies, their global reach, their diverse tactics, and the kind of mixed results they've had in the years since the Ukraine war began.
Right. And I think we've learned that while their effectiveness is still debatable, their activities really do represent this persistent and evolving threat
Right.
that demands a coordinated and strategic response from the entire international community.
We've really seen how audacious they are, their willingness to take risks,
Yeah.
and their determination to get what they want, even if it means, breaking the rules.
It's a reminder that espionage is complex.
Yeah.
It's nuanced and often morally ambiguous.
Right.
It's a world where the lines between right and wrong can get really blurry,
Yeah.
and where the pursuit of national interest can sometimes come at a very high cost.
So the question still remains, how should the world navigate all of this?
Right.
What measures can be taken to counter this threat of Russian espionage while also, maintaining those diplomatic channels and trying to avoid escalation?
It's something we all need to think about.
Yeah.
It's a challenge that demands a very nuanced understanding of history and politics and the human condition.
Right.
And it's a challenge that's going to shape the future of international relations and global security for many years to come.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener.
It has.
Thanks for joining me today and helping us unpack all of this.
My pleasure.
Stay vigilant out there, everyone.